Good morning, folks. I'm Conrad Kennedy, your host today on the show, and I'm delighted to have with me Charlie Gardner, who is a veterinarian. Grew up a farm kid in many ways, and I'm delighted to have you with me, Charlie, to talk about your book. Why don't you describe the book, the title of the book, where the idea for your book came from, and what it's about, and we'll move on from there.
Okay. The title of the book is The Blessed Life of a Cow Doctor. And the title is very appropriate because I have had a blessed life and I was a cow doctor as my profession. Bovine veterinarian would be a little more sophisticated term than cow doctor, but I always saw myself as a cow doctor. And I wrote the book because as I get older, I become aware that I don't know very much about my grandfathers. My mother's father was a dairy farmer, and he passed the farm on to his son, my mother's brother, my uncle, and I spent a lot of my childhood on that dairy farm. And as I get older, I realize I don't know much about my grandfather, who had a dairy farm when they transitioned from horses to tractors, when they transitioned from milking cows by hands to milking cows with machines. He never talked about that in my presence. And I find myself wondering, what was that like? Those are major changes, and wish I knew more about his life. My father's father was a independent businessman in the Great Depression. He went broke. He had 6 children to feed. What was that like? Well, he died before I was ever born. So I heard my dad tell stories about growing up in the Depression, but I wish I knew what it was like to go through that. So recently, I would say recently, 5 years ago, I decided, well, if my grandchildren ever want to know what it was like to be a cow doctor during the 70s and 80s and 90s, they're going to be able to pick up a book and read it. So I wrote the book mostly because I wanted to share those experiences because to me, it was a rich, interesting life, plenty of ups and downs, plenty of frustrations, but lots of reward. And if they're ever interested, I want them to be able to read what it was like to be a cow doctor during that time period. That was the main reason. Secondary reason, I just like to write. I've always liked to write. So it was a chance to do something I like to do. I've always loved to tell stories. I consider myself a fairly gifted storyteller. And so the book was a chance to tell a lot of stories. And the final reason was it gave me a chance to express some deeply held beliefs about my Christian faith. My Christian faith has evolved over many years, and the last section of the book, 12 pages, is devoted to my Christian faith. So the final reason I wrote it, because I wanted to. I just wanted to write the book. Okay.
Charlie, as I read the book, it strikes me as the title is very appropriate in bringing together both your life as a Christian, but as a veterinarian at the same time. And you are a good storyteller. And I wonder if you could tell us one of the stories. Do you remember one of the stories that caught your attention from the vet side?
This is one I often tell because it had a happy ending. Some of them did not. And it was kind of amusing to me. And so it's one I often tell. Situation was I had just got a brand new pickup truck that was fitted with a special unit to carry veterinary drugs and supplies, and had a refrigerator and even had hot and cold running water built into the unit. And it was brand new. And we had recently hired a new graduate to work in our practice, and he was scheduled to ride with me that day. It was a Saturday, and I scheduled to pick him up. And I've always been a morning person, so I left the house around 6 a.m. I had roughly an hour's drive to my first scheduled call, and was going to pick him up on the way and go about my day. Well, I was just about to his home when, back then we didn't have cell phones. We had two-way radios. Two-way radio in the cab of the truck kind of came to life, and I was told that Howard Baker, Now, that's not his real name, but that's the name I'll use for the story. Howard Baker had a cow down, stretched out, bloated, in bad shape, according to him, near death, and somebody had to get there right away. Well, that message had a lot of implications. First of all, I was an hour away from Howard Baker's farm. So nobody was going to, and myself and one other person were only ones working on a Saturday, and the other person was already involved with something else. The second part of the story was Howard Baker was famous for getting essentially hysterical if somebody did not arrive at the farm very quickly. So now my Saturday had a whole new set of implications to it. So I told the receptionist at our office, okay, call Howard Baker back, tell him I'm on my way, but I am an hour away. There's no way I can get there any quicker. And, I'll do the best I can. Okay. So I pick up the student. Luckily, he was ready. As soon as I pulled in the driveway, he ran out the door, jumped in the truck, and off we go. And as we drove, I talked about the implications of a cow down, stretched out, bloated. What could that mean? What could be going on, et cetera, et cetera. But I also said, you're probably going to get a second lesson here, is how to handle an irate client. So we'll see how I do in that department as well as the stretched out cow. So we drove, and after maybe 40 minutes, we're still 20 minutes away. The two-way radio comes back to life, and the receptionist says, just want to warn you, Howard's hysterical. He's yelling, screaming, a lot of profanity. He's going to sue us. His cow will surely die before we get there. And so be prepared for a hysterical client. I said, okay. Finally, we get to Harold's farm. We pull in the driveway, and I look, and I can see our patient surrounded by 3 or 4 men down in a pasture field, just as he described, stretched out, bloated, looks bad. And I got out of the truck to consider things, because to get to this cow, I had to drive down a hill into the pasture field, and it had rained hard the night before. And the problem was going to arise then, how do I get out of there? And I was pondering all this, considering, do I just get what I think I need and walk down? Well, as soon as he saw me looking down, he erupted, stream of profanity, telling me to get my blankety blank, blank, blank down there. Can I see this cow's dying? What are you standing there looking at? Blah, blah, And I finally said, okay, we'll drive down. We'll figure out how to get the truck out later. But I also noted one thing that gave me a little hope, that we probably were going to save this cow. And we did, and we saved her with no medication whatsoever. The situation was, which I could see from where I was looking, is she was laying down, her back was in a little bit of a gully, so her feet were slightly uphill, which means she couldn't sit up. And a cow can't stand up if she can't sit up. And, probably there was nothing physically wrong with the cow. Didn't know that for sure. We get down there, and he is still yelling and screaming, telling us how he's going to sue us if this cow dies, and blah, blah, blah. And because the cow's bloated, he has a length of hose he's been ramming down her throat, hoping to relieve the bloat. But that won't do any good in this situation. I talked to the student. We put a halter on her head, which is just a rope device designed to restrain the cow's head. I told the student to pull, and I asked all these men standing around to push, and we rolled her up. So she's sitting up. She can get her legs under her. She burped several times, loud, smelly burps. And as she burped, the bloat went away. And 2 or 3 minutes later, she got up and walked away. Absolutely fine. Everything got very quiet. Harold suddenly had nothing to say. So finally he said, I guess I overreacted a little. My cows are important to me. And I was determined to stay professional. I said, well, when you see a cow whose backbone is like down in a depression like that, and they can't sit up, the only thing you need to do is get them sitting up, and they'll probably be fine. The only problem now, my truck's still at the bottom of the hill with a very wet pasture field in front of me. So considered having him bring a tractor down to tow me out. But I thought, if maybe I get a running start, I'll be okay. So student and I get back in the truck. We say our final comments to Howard, and I kept myself professional the whole time. And then we tried to make a running start at this hill, and we actually got to the top of the hill, but the tires are spinning a lot, and we're trying to get through the gate back into his driveway, and we're just about through it when we finally just stopped moving. Tires are spinning. What I thought, well, I'll hit the gas. I'll really hit the gas, and I did. We started to move forward again, but then the truck swerved, and my brand new truck hit the side of the gate and put a nice new dent in my brand new truck. So I summed that up by saying, now it's my turn to swear.
I was going to ask, did you stay professional, Charles?
I think I actually did. I kept my profanity more or less internal, but that's one of my favorite stories from practice of just
That's the
had enough experience to immediately size up the situation and bring it to a pretty easy with no medication whatsoever. So yeah, that's a story from the book.
Well, that's delightful. And what did you learn? I mean, you had to learn some things about yourself and about people as you worked with animals. Can you say a little bit about what you learned about yourself over the years and what you learned about working with people like this client?
Well, obviously, we all learn through life. One thing I learned in that particular day, I carried it out pretty well, was to stay respectful, stay professional. Don't descend into wherever they have taken the conversation.
Mm.
And that was a good lesson, and it has served me well when I executed it, because I had times where I blew up and, returned all the insults and profanity, and later would just really regret having gone there. The thing about animals would just try to keep in mind they are animals, and many times they will be frustrating. They will do things that make things difficult or make it far worse because they did something I didn't expect them to do. But they're the animal. I'm the professional, and the farmer's, the professional, and try to always stay patient with animals and not in any way, strike the animal. Usually if a man hits a cow, it's going to hurt the man. But I've witnessed men just explode and beat on, or worse yet, pick up a piece of wood or something and abuse an animal because of, patience finally being, and I avoided doing that. So I'd say patience, professionalism, courtesy, respect always served me well when I was able to follow those rules. Yeah.
Now, Charles, you were debating being a farmer or being a vet.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about that? Because you grew up not a farm kid and grew on your own father's farm, but on your uncle's farm, right?
Correct.
And you were, yeah.
Yeah. The farm was the same farm where my mother grew up. Turned out my grandfather owned 2 homes on 2 adjacent farms. When he bought the adjacent farm, another home came with it. And I grew up in the second house where my parents lived. So it was only a walk across the field to be at the farm. And from a very young age, roughly age 8, I'd go over just to hang out with my uncle because I just loved being around the farm. And he would give me jobs to do that probably were, in today's world, you'd never have an 8-year-old kid driving a tractor, but he would have me driving a tractor. And luckily, no accidents ever happened. But I just loved it. And for a long time, probably till I was 12 or maybe even older, I was going to be a dairy farmer. I was going to be just like my uncle. And one day we were somewhere, and another farmer was present, and he looked at me and said, "Well, young man, what are you going to be when you grow up?" And I said, "I'm going to be a dairy farmer." And my uncle said, "No, you're not. No, you're not. No money in dairy farming. You're going to make something of yourself." And from then on, if I ever mentioned being a dairy farmer, he'd say, "You don't want to be a dairy farmer." So I at the same time, I was exposed to the veterinarian come to the farm, and there's one situation where, similar to the story I just told, there was a cow stretched flat out. It was still dark. It was early in the morning, and I got there and saw this cow stretched out. I thought she was dead. And I said something to my uncle. He said, "Oh, she's not dead. She just has milk fever. The veterinarian's coming to treat her." Well, milk fever is a condition where cows, shortly after having a calf, their blood calcium will drop so low their muscles won't work, they can't stand, and that is an emergency situation. And within a few minutes, the veterinarian pulled in. It was 5:45 in the morning, something still dark. We go out, my uncle has a flashlight, he shines it on the cow, the veterinarian puts a needle in her vein, holds up a bottle attached to a tubing, runs in some solution. 10 minutes later, the cow gets up, similar to my story, gets up, walks away. And I thought, wow, he was a hero. You know, he came out, this cow nearly dead. And that appealed to me. So somehow I thought, well, if I'm not going to be a dairy farmer, maybe I want to be a dairy veterinarian. And that's probably up from age 12, 13. I hardly ever wavered. Once in a while, I'd waver back a little and think, yeah, maybe I really want to be a dairy farmer. But other than that, I never really considered another career. And fortunately, I was able to get the kind of grades I needed to get first into college and then into veterinary school, and the rest, you know, is history. But yeah, it was working on my uncle's dairy farm that gave me an introduction to the dairy industry, and I've been fascinated by it ever since.
Folks, this is a interesting memoir. I was going to say find another description, but Charlie weaves into the book the stories of the veterinarian, the experience he's had, as you heard him this morning, but also his own personal life and his faith. Charlie, you want to talk a little bit about how your faith has informed maybe your professional life, or just talk about your faith a bit? Why is it important to you?
Yes, my faith is very important to me at this stage of my life. I think like a lot of people, I grew up in the 1950s and 60s. My parents went to church every Sunday. I have 4 siblings. We all went too. At one point, my mother was my Sunday school teacher. At one point, my father was my Sunday school teacher. So we were brought up in a strong Christian family. Like a lot of people during my teenage years, I became skeptical and thought maybe all this religious stuff was a bunch of hooey, and quit. Only went to church because my parents made me go to church. And once I was in college and I married young, my wife and I married while we were both in college, and we never went to church, never thought much about it, didn't miss it, didn't need it, et cetera, et cetera. Interestingly enough, when our first 2 children were born, we had them both baptized. So apparently there was some remnants of Christian faith there. And then as I was about to say as luck would have it, but our former pastor always told us there's no such thing as luck, only blessings. When we took our first job right out of veterinary school, we moved into a home that was right next door to the United Methodist Church in the little village of Ackermanville, Pennsylvania. So there's the church right next door. We had 2 children by then. We thought, well, we want our children at least exposed to the organized church. So we started taking our children, and we thought, well, if it's going to take the children, we ought to go too. Within a year, we were very, very involved in that church. It was both our spiritual life and our social life. My own Christian faith was still, I would say, evolving, growing, and I hope it's still growing today. But the church became very important to us, and we've been active in church ever since. I'm trying to find the words. I guess I maybe already said it. My faith has evolved from a lot of taking the Bible absolutely literally, but wondering how can some of these passages be true, some of them contradict each other, to a more of a spiritual approach where the Bible speaks truth and must be interpreted in an attitude of prayer that gives us God's message within that scripture.
Yeah, I really like. Go ahead.
So that's where I am today. I read scripture frequently. I've read the Bible several times, but it's always through the filter. What is God telling me with this scripture today? And that's how I live out my Christian faith, I'd say, asking myself on a regular basis, what is God asking of me? Rather than judging other people who somehow, in my mind, don't live up to the scriptures. Just ask myself, what is God calling me to do? And if I take it that way, usually, often it's fairly clear what God wants me to do. And if not, I just need to pray and ponder it some more. Anyway.
Well, it's one of the things I appreciate also about the book and about you, Charles, is the way that you have this very gracious, very tolerant, very open, very warm, outward expression of love, compassion for your neighbor, and I use the neighbor broadly, but for other people in the world. And one of the things you enjoy doing is going to churches, small groups, telling your stories, sharing your faith, and you're open to doing that with those who might be interested, correct?
Yes, as I said, I've always enjoyed telling stories. You might have been able to tell I enjoyed telling a story about the cow stretched out in the pasture field. And I've found that many people are fascinated with veterinary medicine and enjoy hearing stories from a veterinarian. And I do have a few stories also from the time I spent in small animal practice, pet practice. So there's some of those stories there too. And some references to my Christian faith, and particularly times when I just felt God blessed me beyond expectations. Times when I should have either been hurt, possibly even killed, but somehow God spared me. And don't always understand why do some get spared as I was and some don't get spared. I don't understand that. Don't pretend to understand it, but he spared me. I use the term he, but I do perceive God as being genderless, but hard to break old habits. And I'm weaving that into the stories, the blessings God's provided me over life. So, yeah, I do enjoy doing that.
Where can people get your book, Charlie?
You can get it on Amazon, like most everything else. If you go on Amazon and type in The Blessed Life of a Cow Doctor, it'll come up immediately. If you type in Charles Gardner, DVM, or even Charles Gardner, I think it will also come up. So I'd invite anybody who thinks they'd like to read a little bit more about The Blessed Life of a Cow Doctor to go on Amazon and type in the name of the book, and it should pop right up. And yeah, hope you enjoy it, anybody who buys it.
And I have the sense, Charles, that people who are without faith, secular, could enjoy the book, and people with faith, because you invite people to understand your faith, but there's no coercion or anything like that. It's just you being you. There's a genuineness, authenticity to who you are, Charlie, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. One of the highest compliments I ever received came from my son. And I'll try to quote him correctly. He said, "My dad is a man of faith. He doesn't flaunt it. He doesn't hide it. He just lives it." So I would hope maybe that shows up in the book as well.
It does show up in the book, and it shows up in your life and as I've gotten to know you. And so thank you for being part of our show today. And we will put on the postscript with this podcast how people can access the book, how they can get a hold of you if they're interested in having you come to speak, and any other relevant information. So thanks for being a part of our show today, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Well, we'll just let it go, and it'll stop recording then. Sorry about the dog interruption. I'll cut that out. But that was great. That was great, Charlie. So what I'll do is get this on podcast. I'll have you look at it and see if you want it on YouTube. People can Google it there. You can use it. You can use it to send to email lists or to folks who you might think might be interested. And so we'll stay focused on the first book here. I didn't say anything about the second book. I'm going to continue to promote the first book. and then even as we continue to work on the second book. All right.
Yes. Couple other things. The last thing I sent you, I want to change one sentence in it, and I'll send it again.
Okay. Is that the Facebook blurb?
It's I just sent it. It's the last thing I sent. It's fairly long. It's like 6 or 8 pages long, much longer than the
Okay.
rest.
Okay.
And
I haven't looked at it yet.
I thought of something relevant that I want to change one sentence. So look for you can delete the one I sent. I'm going to send you a different
Okay.
one.
Okay.
And then I sent you a lot of other stuff. I hope I didn't overwhelm you. I said that my daughter told me maybe if I did another book, I'd want to write about some of the painful things in
Yes.
my.
Yes.
So I sent you 3 things that deal with painful, and I just
Yes.
sent them to you as they were. 2 of them were journaling. One was a letter that I wrote but never mailed. It'll give you some background, and I guess I'm interested in. My thoughts are I don't want to write about those specific incidences and publish it, but I might try to write something that refers to them and allows me to take a look at myself and why they were so painful.
That sounds like a terrific approach. I think
And
that, go ahead.
so that's what I have in mind. I'd be very open to anything you have to say. I say it somewhat jokingly, but there's a seriousness to it too. I was going to tell you, you don't have to be my therapist this time. I've already talked to a therapist about it.
Yeah.
But as a writing coach, I thought it might be useful to you to hear some of the background and where I was when I wrote those things and et cetera. I am getting some contributions to the book. I have to be careful. My wife's not listening. I don't think she is. About that book. And what I'm expecting is that maybe in July we shift focus totally to that book. But I'll probably send you stuff as it comes. But I'd like to have all the stuff or the bulk of it together before we start working on it. So that
And
one
when
can
do you
be.
want that book to come out?
I want to give it to her for Christmas. So
Okay,
if
yeah, we
we
got
could
time.
publish it in November, I would like it to be published even so.
Yeah.
Christmas, so we have time.
Yeah.
And with the other book, is really no timetable on it. We kind of referred to maybe over the next 8 months we could do them. I'm excited about the group you're putting together. So I expect to be on the June 10th.
Excellent.
Excellent. And yeah, I think this is one of those things. You'll see if you read the latest thing I sent you. I sum it up with, if we could have fewer expectations and just live life as it comes to us, we might be happier. So I've tried to keep my expectations to a minimum here and just experience it as it comes. And I think that's all going to work out.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
It's the way I've tended to live my life. And I think that's what the walk of faith is all about, Charlie, that God will take care of the details, but we keep moving. And if we're going the wrong way, he'll show us. But I'm with you. And it's one of the things I appreciate about the way you describe your faith. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to have a block of time today to write, to do to work on my writing work, and yours is the only one I'm going to paying attention to. So I will get back to you. I was thinking we were meeting at 3. I was going to do it before, so I will do it now and send it to you by email. All right?
That's fine. That's fine. And let me know when you want to meet again. I think you referred maybe it would probably be bi-weekly, every other week, I think.
Yeah, so I would say let's
fine.
meet in 2 weeks. Let's meet in 2 weeks, and I will do some more interviewing, some more questions, and we'll talk about where you're at. But I'll do some more, see if any more stories emerge, and let's keep working at it.
Okay, sounds good.
So why don't we set a date? Why don't we say would 2 weeks from today work? At 9 o'clock again.
Um, could we move it to Thursday at 9 o'clock, the 13th?
Yep, got it.
Yeah, Thursday the 13th, 9 a.m. There'll be emails back and forth in the meantime.
Yep. Yep.
I like your comment in the last email that, you'd like to have some sort of, maybe contract is too formal, but at least some written guidelines. I'm very
Yeah.
comfortable with that. So, but for now, we'll say Thursday, the 13th of June, 9 a.m.
Yep. Great.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thanks. I'll be back in touch.
All right. Bye.
Bye.